Lena Cho liked to be the first one at Patchwork Garden in the morning, before the commuters began hurrying past on Maple Avenue and before the dogs pulled their owners toward the park. She was 73. Her knees ached and her eyesight was fading at the edges, but each dawn she still felt the same thrill she had felt 4 years earlier on the day volunteers had pried up the sun-bleached asphalt of the abandoned parking lot and discovered good brown soil beneath. They had brought in compost, built raised beds from discarded pallets, and hammered together a sign whose splintered boards spelled out "Patchwork" in crooked letters. No one could agree on a better name, and after a while, the mismatched slats, like the mismatched neighbors, felt exactly right. On the first Tuesday of May, Lena unlocked the chain link gate and stopped halfway down the path. All 9 beds were flowering at once. That was peculiar enough, only the radishes should have been blossoming. Yet the real oddity was the pattern. Bright yellow mustard blooms formed a neat spiral in bed 1. Purple pea flowers formed a mirror human spiral in bed 2. Bed 3 held white arugula blossoms in the shape of a broad arrow. The morning sun caught droplets of dew on every petal, so the whole garden seemed to glitter with intentionality as though an unseen artist had worked all night arranging blooms like mosaic tile. Lena crouched, frowned, and told herself she was too old to believe in fairies. She was about to fetch her pruners when Malik Johnson, the wiry 15-year-old who claimed the garden had taught him more biology than school, arrived on his skateboard. He braked so hard, gravel sprayed Lena's calves. "Miss Cho, you see that? Looks like crop circles." "Flower circles," Lena corrected automatically, but she could not deny the uncanny precision. Even the volunteer nasturtiums at the fence line had arranged themselves in tidy rings, orange inside, yellow outside, with a single vacant gap facing the tool shed as though inviting entry. By 7 a.m., more gardeners trickled in. Mr. Ahmed from the corner halal grocery, Dr. Joe, the retired plant pathologist, Carmen Ortega, who grew peppers so hot they required a legal waiver at block parties. Everyone saw the same thing. Everyone exchanged theories, aliens, pranksters, secrets, city art project, but no one could explain how dozens of species had blossomed simultaneously and arranged themselves overnight. Dr. Zoe eventually said what the rest of them were afraid to voice. "It looks like communication." Silence settled as fat as humidity. Malik laughed too loudly. "Plants can't talk." I mean, I know there's that whole chemical signaling thing, but this is geometry, yet geometry remained. The spiral of mustard blossoms led the eye toward a bare circle of soil in the center of bed 1. The arrow in bed 3 pointed at the stored shed. When someone finally opened the shed, the missing watering cans stood in a neat row, each filled to the brim as if prepared. The spouts pointed toward the children's garden on the south side, where, they discovered, the strawberries were wilting. That might have been the day Patchwork solved its own riddle. The community simply followed instructions it had not consciously interpreted. They carried the cans to the strawberries, watered until the soil darkened, then refilled the cans at the street hydrant. When they returned, the spirals already seemed to loosen, petals dropping like spent confetti. By afternoon, the beds looked ordinary again, except, as Dr. Zhou noted, mustard was still blooming 3 weeks early. Word spread. Neighbors who had never bothered to join the garden asked for tours, clucking tongues when Lena told them there was nothing to see. Social media, meanwhile, had plenty to see. Malik's photos of the blossom maps racked up likes and disbelief in equal measure. But Patchwork stayed quiet for 11 days. On the 12th, patterns returned. This time, the cucumbers had twined into letters, actual cursive letters spelling water east. The vines had never before grown taller than the knee-high trellis. Yet overnight, they had arched gracefully upward, using each other as support. On the eastern fence, the rain barrels were inexplicably empty, their spigots dripping on dry, cracked soil that once fed the pollinator bed. The group obeyed, again, lugging hose after hose, until an unspoken sense of completion soothed their nerves. By evening, the word water had shriveled back into illegibility. The third message came during a heat wave. Tomatoes formed red, concentric circles around a single volunteer sunflower. Malik's little sister, Aisha, noticed that when she stood at the center and looked outward, each circle aligned with another feature: compost bin, potting table, worm tower, picnic bench. "It's a map," she declared. The circles traced shortest paths between communal resources, as if suggesting a more efficient layout. Over the next 3 Saturdays, the gardeners reorganized the physical space of Patchwork, guided by circles that disappeared one by one as each improvement finished. When the sunflower's petals finally dropped, the garden looked different. More open, less cluttered, its footpaths widened for wheelchairs, its water barrel elevated on cinder blocks to create usable pressure. They held a potluck to celebrate and discovered no one minded walking an extra 10 steps for Basil if the new wheelchair ramp let Mrs. Ortega's husband, Raul, visit for the first time in years. By midsummer, even skeptics admitted Patchwork was alive, and not merely alive in the botanical sense, but aware. Mrs. Haskins, who lived across the street and still grumbled that gardens attracted rats, nevertheless aimed her window fan outward each night so it can smell the lasagna. Dr. Joe stopped short of using the word sentient in public, but kept 2 notebooks, one for soil pH and rainfall, another for communications. She logged bloom times, pattern complexity, and the interval between requests, searching for grammar in petals and phylogeny and punctuation. Malik stuck LED cameras on broom handles to record time lapses, convinced he could catch the plants moving fast enough to braid vines or twist stems into symbols. The footage showed only normal growth speeds, though occasionally a shadow passed that did not match any gardener present. He nicknamed the phenomenon the conductor. Not every gardener welcomed the strangeness. Martin Rousseau, who leased one of the private plots in back, declared the whole thing a hoax. He accused Malik of rigging lights or chemicals. When Malik retorted that Martin never showed up except to harvest and sell his heirloom tomatoes to the gastropub downtown, Martin threatened to sue for defamation. Lena stepped between them, wielding her cane like a sword. Tempers cooled, but resentment stuck like burdock burrs. In August, the city announced budget cuts. The small grant that paid for tools, mulch, and liability insurance would disappear next year. Without it, Patchwork might close. At the emergency meeting in the library basement, debates ricocheted. Charge higher membership fees, solicit sponsors, privatize half the beds. Martin Russo waved spreadsheets proving the restaurant would pay premium rates if the best beds grew exclusive produce. "We can save the garden," he insisted, "just not all of it." He eyed the pollinator flowers as if they were freeloaders. Lena looked at the younger faces of Malik, Aisha, college student Priya, and saw hope shriveling like lettuce in sun. She wished the garden would bloom another message, something inspirational. But for 2 weeks, nothing extraordinary appeared. Leaves drooped in the heat, people bickered about finances, pumpkins ripened sluggishly, and Martin kept recruiting allies for his privatization plan. Then, on the last Saturday of August, Lena arrived early again. Dew sparkled on every surface. A dense corridor of sunflowers had sprung up overnight between the private plots and communal beds, sunflowers that had not been there the evening before. Their tall stalks leaned inward, forming a golden tunnel. The central disc of each flower displayed a dark pattern of seeds, arranged not in the usual Fibonacci swirls, but in stark block shapes, like pixels spelling letters. She walked the corridor and read, "To grow, all must give." At the far end, the last sunflower head bore an arrow of dark seeds, pointing toward a vacant rectangle of earth, the neglected compost heap. And beyond that, a tangled mess of morning glory vines had woven themselves into a net across the gate that led to Martin's plot. If you wanted to reach his tomatoes, you would have to duck and crawl. Nothing dangerous, just annoying enough. When Martin arrived and saw the obstacle, he cursed loud enough to startle pigeons off the telephone wires. He tried tearing vines away, but fresh tendrils recoiled, then snapped forward like green rubber bands and slapped his wrists. He yelped, more indignant than injured. The rest of the gardeners, dozens now, alerted by texts, stood watching. Sunflowers nodded gently in the breeze, their message unambiguous. Malik said, "Guess the garden's voting. Plants don't vote," Martin replied. "They also don't write English," Carmen said. "Yet here we are." Martin glared at the compost heap the arrow indicated. It was half the size it should have been. Hardly anyone contributed food scraps anymore. The heat made it stink, so people preferred to toss peels in city bins. "Fine," he muttered. "You want me to compost? I'll compost." He marched toward his car, fetched cardboard boxes of cold tomatoes the restaurant had deemed blemished, and dumped the fruit into the heap. Juice splashed his shoes, fruit flies rose in a buzzing plume. Everyone flinched at the smell sweet, but edging toward rot. Then a remarkable thing happened. The pulp soaked instantly into the pile like soil swallowing water. Steam rose, scented with something not unpleasant, rich, loamy, alive. The heap shuddered, eased, and sagged as though it had eaten a satisfying meal. The sunflower's arrow rotated, slowly, undeniably, toward the water barrels. The crowd gasped. Lena felt heat prickle her scalp. Martin, eyes wide, filled a bucket and doused the compost, which sighed audibly. When he stepped back, droplets clung to his beard. He looked bewildered but not angry. That afternoon, every household on Maple Avenue seemed to remember forgotten carrot tops, brown lettuce, stale bread. Children dragged wagon loads of scraps, laughing as the pile gulped them down. By dusk, the compost heap had grown a crust of fine black humus at its edges. The sunflowers shed petals like gold confetti, their duty fulfilled. The garden remained quiet for several weeks. September brought cooler nights, pumpkins fattened, kale sweetened. Lena caught Martin pausing by the children's bed to pinch suckers off tomato vines, something he had never bothered with before. When their eyes met, he nodded, embarrassed, and she realized he was listening for instructions like the rest of them. Discussion about funding continued, but the tone had changed. People proposed barter fairs, seedling sales, salsa competitions. Carmen suggested packaging Raul's wheelchair-accessible salsa recipe with jars from the communal peppers. Malik designed labels. Priya's employer donated blank stickers. Even Mrs. Haskins volunteered to sew cloth jar toppers, so it looks Pinteresty. Patchwork, however, still offered no explicit guidance, and Dr. Zhou worried the silence meant disapproval. Silence ended the night. The first frost warning came earlier than anyone predicted. Lena's phone pinged at 3:02 a.m. with a single photo from Malik, an aerial view licking with moonlight captured from his bedroom window. The ants glowed pale silver except for a grid of bright white rectangles on the mulch between rows. At first, Lena thought it was snow, but no, frost doesn't fall in shapes. She dressed, hurried down in the dark, and found squares of hay mulch outlined by luminous mushrooms, each cap shining faintly, bioluminescent like ghost fungus. The rectangles formed a tessellated path from the tool shed to the far corner, where burlap frost covers lay stacked. It was unmistakably a to-do list. Within the hour, gardeners arrived, bundled in coats. They draped burlap over peppers, tucked kale under low hoops, harvested basil by flashlight. The mushroom rectangles winked out one by one as tasks were completed, leaving only darkness sparkling with breath-lit lanterns. Sunrise revealed the frost glinting on rooftops, but not a single withered leaf inside Patchwork. The neighboring park's annuals were blackened, but the garden lay green, burlap gently steaming in the sun. Mrs. Haskins wept quietly. "I never cared about plants," she admitted, "but it cared about us." Nobody missed the unspoken us that now included her. October waned. Funding paperwork was due November 1st, and despite renewed spirit, they were short. Grants for educational gardens required documented curricula. Malik proposed they describe Patchwork itself as the curriculum. Lesson 1, he typed, "Listen to life." Lena thought that lovely, but unlikely to convince bureaucrats. They needed a plan, workshops, measurable outcomes, partnerships with schools. The last Friday of October, yet another bloom message arrived. Marigolds had seeded themselves freely all summer, and now, as if choreographed, withered heads toppled to reveal seeds, arranged in lines across the beds, dashes, and dots. Unmistakable Morse code. Malik, who had once earned a Boy Scout badge before quitting Scouts in protest of an anti-LGBTQ policy, translated aloud. Asked the children under the message, seedlings poked up, not marigold volunteers, but tiny brassica sprouts, the cold-tolerant greens they never planted. Dr. Zhou identified them as Tatsoi, Mizuna, Kamatsuna. Fast growers, perfect for a youth program on winter greens. They invited local elementary teachers to bring classes. Children traced leaf veins and recorded data in journals. They learned fractions by dividing harvests among soup kitchens. They built bug hotels and experimented with how different mulches affected soil temperature, feeding results into spreadsheets for math lessons. For every new project, blooms or seed patterns arranged themselves overnight on the kids' gathering table, like an agenda written in petals. Teachers loved it. Photographs filled binders. Lena attached those to the grant application. The city granted them double the previous funding, labeling Patchwork an innovative living classroom. Celebrations erupted at the December solstice bonfire, where dried corn stalks crackled, and the kids sang a song Aisha had composed, "We are seeds of one another." Through winter, messages ceased, the garden slept, snow piled, and communal pots of dwarf spruce wore fluffy hats. People still visited, shoveling the path, hanging bird feeders, talking in low tones as though the place were a convalescent relative. Martin used his truck to haul free wood chips for the path. Carmen taught Malik how to pressure can tomatoes. Mrs. Ortega crocheted a scarf for Dr. Joe. They were, Lena realized, following instructions no one needed written anymore. March whispered thaw. Earth smelled of penny copper and earthworm. On the equinox, tiny crocuses arose in perfect rings around the stump of the old maple that had shaded half the lot before lightning felled it years earlier. The rings formed a circle big enough for people to hold hands. They did so instinctively, 40-some neighbors and friends, forming living petals around a memory of a tree. Lena, at the circle's northernmost point, thought she felt the ground humming through her soles. Maybe it was just blood pressure. She didn't care. A breeze rustled plastic in the tool shed. The door swung open, though no one had touched it. Inside, leek seedlings glowed pale green. Already sprouted in trays somebody must have sown days earlier. Yet no one had. A handwritten label read U.S. next to the planting date. That very morning, no pattern spelled commands, no vines formed grammar, only the gentle promise of seedlings waiting for transplant. Malik cupped one tray in his hands. "Guess it's our turn to talk," he said. Lena nodded. She looked across patchwork, at compost steaming softly, at barrels brimming with captured rain, at beds eager for spring luxuriance. She imagined a language not of petals, but of actions, the tasks they chose before being asked, the care given without invitation. Perhaps that was the lesson all along. A sentient garden could teach cooperation only so far. Sooner or later, its students must graduate from obedience to initiative, from reading messages to embodying them. So they dispersed without instruction, prying winter mulch from soil, mixing compost into beds, planning crop rotations. They worked until sunlight slanted gold through budding sycamores, until Malik's skateboard clattered against the fence and Mrs. Haskins called everyone in for tea, brewed from last year's dried lemon balm. No supernatural sign marked the end of the day, only ordinary hunger and fellowship as dusk enfolded Maple Avenue. Lights flickered on in apartment windows. Inside patchwork, the new seedlings rested in trays beneath burlap. A red-winged blackbird chose the compost bin as its nighttime perch. In the hush between day and night, Lena swore she heard the garden sigh, not with fatigue, but satisfaction, the sound of a teacher whose students at last had learned to teach themselves.